Hello and welcome to my video. Now before I really get into stuff on this one, let me just tell you something about this board. This was a painting that I painted yesterday, or this is what's left of it. It ended up okay, but I decided to wipe it off because the video that I had made of it basically came out as black. It was completely useless. I didn't feel like redoing it, so I thought, well, I'll try something new. Now, before I get into the main theme of this video, I'll just tell you something. The green that is left on the picture is sap green. There's a little bit of red ochre in it, my usual colours. But this colour that I'm putting on is phthalo blue, and straight from the tube, because I know that later it will mix with other colours and it will be toned down. So, what I wanted to say is some people say, when they look at my paintings, they say, "Oh, you're so clever. You're obviously very talented." All that stuff. I'm not a great believer in talent. I tend to be a believer in dedication and I guess confidence in what you're doing. Let me clarify that. When I was a kid, back in the days of black and white television. Some of you will have trouble getting your mind around that, but yes, so once upon a time, television was only in black and white, and I remember it clearly. So there used to be programs on TV showing people drawing things. There was something called, in England, something called Art Attack, which was quite interesting, and they would show speeded up or sped up film of someone drawing something or painting or whatever. And I remember as a child looking at this, and instead of thinking, oh, I wish I could do that, I remember the thought that went through my head was, I could do that. So basically what I'm trying to say is you have to have belief in yourself. Now, a certain amount of training is useful, and I hope these videos help you. Because quite frankly, if you see somebody doing something like this, it does tend to give the feeling that, I can do that. If I watch, I can actually do it, because we learn better by copying. That's my thought, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. So, when I was a child, I used to draw quite a lot. Ridiculous things. I'd draw dinosaurs. Well, actually, I don't think dinosaur. I don't think, start again on that. I don't think dinosaurs are a ridiculous thing to draw. It's just that there wasn't a lot else around. So, I had toy dinosaurs and stuff. And so I would approach the pictures in a different way. Rather than hesitate, I would just dive straight in and try and draw or paint, whatever it was that I was, my subject, as fast as possible. And I noticed gradually over the years that technique was working quite well. Also, when I went to college, we were told and in fact encouraged to work fast, and we would draw anything. You may find this amusing. When I first went to college, I was quite young, 16, and I'll never forget my first life drawing lesson. Nobody had warned me. I couldn't believe it. Sitting in this studio with a bunch of other students back in the late 60s, and suddenly this person who had been wearing a plastic Mac suddenly disrobed. It was a woman, and she walked into the middle of the circle that had been formed by the students sitting on their benches or at their easels, and she took off the plastic Mac, and of course she was completely naked. That took me a little while to get used to the idea, but I learned quickly. I noticed that a few other students had almost passed out from shock, that I think they didn't realise what life drawing really entailed. Anyway, so apart from that, we were told and taught to draw anything. We drew anything and everything. If it had recently breathed or twitched or was still twitching, we would draw it. People with no clothes, people with clothes, just heads, hands, feet, knees, you name it, we drew it. Some of the most boring lessons were to just draw a rock. They'd have a rock. Everyone would have their own rock. It was like, have a pet rock for the day and draw it. And it was observational drawing. You had to draw that rock in hyper detail. Back to this painting very quickly. You notice I've made a few textures in the distance. And I'm doing it in various ways, either by using the brush in a sideways motion, with lots of linseed oil added, I might add, or with the palette knife, which you can see that I'm using here. The greens again in the foreground is sap green mixed with red ochre, and this is yellow ochre that I'm putting in with a palette knife, and that is going to be a field which is catching the light, and that will all become obvious later. So anyway, back to my college story. Yeah, we drew everything. If we weren't in the college, if the weather was good, in the summer, we would be sent out around the town, which was Eastbourne on the south coast of the UK. And we would draw cliffs by the sea. We would be sent to another town further along the coast called Newhaven, and we would draw fishing boats in the harbour, which are actually quite interesting subjects to draw because there's lots of twiddly bits on them. Frankly, a boat with no twiddly bits can be a little bit boring. So there are lots of details and bumpy bits and ropes and pulleys and that sort of thing. And sometimes we would just be sent around the town of Eastbourne just to sit in the street and draw whatever we saw in front of us. And I'm sure that the tutors occasionally would send us to the most boring part of the town just to see what we could make of it. So it's partially about drawing and repetition, but frame of mind is very important. You have to believe that you can do it, and you mustn't be afraid if you can't, because if you keep drawing and keep practicing and keep painting, eventually, as the saying goes, the paint knows where to go. And it's a learning curve that can break people. Some people will start to paint or draw, it'll go wrong, and they'll come to the conclusion that they can't do it. Now that's not the time when you want to stop. That's the time when you want to try harder. And obviously we all have different levels of concentration and dedication to what we're doing, so you need to be a little bit obsessive. So there we are. That's my bundle of tips before we really get into this picture. This light blue is royal blue, which is sometimes in France. I use a French paint called made by Le Franc-en-Bourgeois. I'll put a link. Actually, there's not much point me putting a link. I can put a link to a shop in France where you could buy the paint online, but the website is in French. So unless you understand a bit of French, it's going to be a bit tricky to navigate. But it's a shop which will send the paint to you, providing you can get through their website. This is royal blue. In France, they call it bleu rex or bleu rex. Wonderful colour for skies. You don't have to do much to it. I tend to use it straight out the tube onto the board or whatever I'm painting on, and then add light colours to it and or add white to it later. But it is the perfect sky colour for the pale blue that you get in skies. Now you can see also here that the green that was left on the canvas is still there, and it's still wet because it's only 24 hours since I erased the other painting, which I will show at the end of the video so you can see what it was that I tried to video. Possibly, I don't know, maybe it will show you how stupid I am, but I did actually, as you can see, wiped it off and painted this over it. So some people may think, well, why didn't you keep it and start a new one? Well, to be frank, I like the textures and the tones that you get on a board when you eradicate a painting that hasn't worked. It can leave some quite interesting accidental tones and shapes. In fact, I have a photograph that I took of a canvas before I painted on it. There was a painting underneath, and I just chucked a load of gesso on top. And the result was, after a few coats of gesso, that the thing underneath showed through a little bit, and it actually made quite an interesting landscape without actually doing anything. So I'll be working on that soon. This is Japanese red. Now, lots of people ask me about Japanese red. They say they can't get it. And now this is made by Le Franc-Bourgeois. If you can't get it, there's not much point asking me for an answer to where you get it, particularly if you're in America, because it seems that it just doesn't exist over there. So it's you don't have to use Japanese red. You can just use cadmium red. Stick a bit of white in it, and a little bit of yellow, and you'll get something similar. But anyway, so this is my, obviously, I'm going to state the obvious again here. This is my big brush, and this is just for smoothing out a little bit. So I've put some red on there, and that's just going to show through a little bit at the end, not too much. So I'm just sort of mushing it around a bit just to get a bit of variation in the sky. You'll notice that the blue over to the right-hand side on the landscape, there's some drips. Now that can happen if you put a bit too much oil in, and I did. So what I did, although you won't see it, I laid the painting down flat for a while, and I just went over the blue just a little bit with some paper towel to pick up the drips and to just prevent them from travelling all the way down to the bottom of the painting. Bit more Japanese red. There's something that I always tell my students, is that when you add a colour, you have to decide, am I going to be subtle or am I going to really just make a bold statement? And this is me making a slightly more bold statement. In other words, I put some red on before, just isn't enough. Just didn't give me the effect that I wanted, so I obviously just chucked a bit more on. And in a moment or two, I will be adding Payne's Grey. So the colours at the moment are Phthalo blue, royal blue, Japanese red, sap green, and a little bit of red ochre, not much. And this is the Payne's Grey. Now this sky is based on a sky I saw, in fact, last night. I went out. It wasn't a particularly colourful sky, but I liked the shape, so I just remembered what it looked like. You could do this with a brush. I just like I like to add it with a palette knife, because before I start smoothing it, I want this colour to sit on the top of all the other colours. If I put this colour on with a brush, it would immediately soak in. Not all artists will agree with this. It's just my way of doing it, so it's entirely up to you. It's just that I find if I put the paint on with a palette knife, it sits on the surface, and then I can blend it with the big brush later on. At the end of this video, I'm going to put a few pictures up of other artwork that I've done, just to show you the various styles that I use and have used over the years. I'm going to put up a sketch for a portrait, a preliminary pencil drawing of a man's head. Also, I'm going to put up something that I did quite a few years ago now, and it's the only time I've ever done it, and it's a bit of, in England we call it scraper board, and I think in America you call it scratch board, which is where you get a piece of white card which has got a coating, usually of china clay, on the surface, and you paint a black shape with Indian ink, and then you scrape into it using whatever you like. I mean, you can use needles. I used a scalpel for this, and it took quite a long time. You'll see it at the end of the video anyway, but it possibly will explain to you why I actually don't like to do detail anymore. It's the only time I've done scraper board, and I can say with all confidence it's the last time that I'll do it, because it took so long. It's very intricate work, and it nearly drove me completely nuts. Also, I'll put up a picture of one of my legal forgeries. I did a bit of work for a company that produced fakes. They were legitimate fakes for people with lots of money, and they wanted duplicates of existing works of art, or they wanted what's called a pastiche, which means that you do a painting in the style of a certain artist. So that'll be at the end of the video, and if I can find a few more photographs, I'll put those up as well, just to show you that it's good to practice. It's good to test out different styles. But of course, all my life, you see, I've been a graphic designer, which means that you not only design things like magazines and books and that sort of thing, but you also do illustration work usually. Not so much now. I think there tend to be graphic designers and illustrators, and they're quite separate entities. Maybe it's always been like that, but I always wanted to be able to do a little bit of everything, so I kept my hand in as much as possible. And anyway, you'll see those at the end. Please don't skip forward though, because otherwise you'll lose out all these little gems of information here. So now it's time for me to put the highlights on the cloud. It looks a mess at the moment, but it comes together when you get the big brush onto it. And always remember this, something I always tell people: if you're painting a landscape, the clouds must go off the edge of the picture. I always tell people this, the cloud has a life outside your painting. Imagine you're looking through a window, you can't see the whole cloud, some of it's obscured, and that's the bit that goes off the edge. This is the part of the painting I really enjoy. It's you never quite know. Well, no, that's wrong. I've done it so many times. I do know the effect that I'm going to get. If you've never done this before, you'll be quite surprised at the kind of sky that you'll produce using this method. When I'm doing this part of the painting on the sky, I'm not trying to duplicate what I've seen or what is in my memory. What I'm doing is trying to paint the feeling that the sky gave me at the time, and to get the sort of movement into it, just to evoke an emotion. Painting is more about the feeling that a landscape gives you, rather than duplicating it like a photograph, because why bother? Why not just take a photo? So here we go, and it's it's a very light touch. It looks as though I'm being a bit heavy-handed, but I'm not. I'm basically skimming over the board. It's just I'm painting on plywood, by the way. That's why it's wobbling a bit. I do paint on canvas, but I've really got the taste for plywood. I like the smoothness, and I like the fact that I dictate what the textures are going to be, rather than the texture of canvas always showing through. So I get texture from my brush, and also how I use the brush. Even my fingers sometimes, which are always useful on clouds, get quite a nice effect. You see that I've smudged a little bit of the sky into the landscape. Those will be taken care of at the end. Never panic when you do something like that, because it's not the end of the world. In fact, there we go. So rather than wipe off that bit of sky, I just move the landscape up to it. So there's another one there, a few little humpy bits on the top there. Always, it's a jiggle. You have to jiggle your brush. There's a nice one there to the left, which I'll come to in a minute. That looks like not sure what it looks like, but it's like some kind of radio mast that's fallen over. So here we go. turn it into a hill. As you do it, make sure that you leave some light in between the dark bits. It's just it excites the eye, bit of contrast. And then the brush more horizontally rather than the broad side of the brush, and that'll give you the nice long flat clouds that near the horizon, which actually adds to the perspective. This year, obviously, for many people has been dreadful, to put it mildly. And my problems of losing basically all of my students for this year seem quite small, and I will survive the year. So next year, it'll all start, hopefully next year, it'll all start again. People can come here to have lessons, either on a one-to-one basis or as part of a group. I had two, well, you never know. I might have a venue in August if everything goes back to normal, but I'm not holding my breath on this. My June venue is pretty well, I guess, yeah, pretty well is an understatement. It's wiped out, so that's going to be, that's just not going to happen. August, I don't know, there's a slim chance, but as I said, I'm not holding my breath on that. So next year, if you decide you want to come here for my classes, contact me through my website, which the link will be below in the info box. There is a contact page, and in fact, if you go to my website and go to the retreats section, you'll find a lot of information there. But for the one-to-one classes, just contact me and I'll get back in touch with you and send you my information sheet. So yeah, I did have a lot of people booked this year, and now it's gone very quiet. So I'm left with rather a lot of pieces of plywood that are exactly 80 by 60 centimeters. That was mine. I like that size. This size. I like that size for working on. It's comfortable and it's just the right size to bang out a quick painting on. Oh, well, I say bang out. I mean, carefully create. One of the things that people do when they start painting is they think, oh, I'll just do a small picture. It's the worst thing you can do. Don't do a small picture. Do something at least this size. 80 by 60 centimeters. I'll put the measurement on the screen for people who don't use centimeters, and so you can get an idea. Yeah, work bigger, it's always better. Anyway, we're pretty well at the end here, so thanks for watching. Please do as the little bouncy thing on the screen says, and please subscribe if you like my video, and hit the little bell icon so you know when I've uploaded a new video. Okay, now as promised, here's what was on the board before I painted over it, and one of my pencil drawings. This is a preliminary sketch for an oil painting. My one and only scraper board image. That was enough detail for me to last a lifetime. And one of my copies which has been aged to look authentic. Hope you've enjoyed it. Take care, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye for now.